leurs enfants, un clocher pour les mariages, les pionniers traversent le temps, ils rêvent d'un village, des cours d'école pour leurs enfants, un clocher pour les mariages, Maillardville, tu as 100 ans.
We, the Maillardville Story Project, Tri-Cities Community TV, have gotten a grant from the City of Coquitlam, which itself got a grant from the Francophone Affairs Program in Victoria. Basically also covering monies coming from the federal government, which was also in cooperation and an agreement with the province, pursuing the stories of Canada from sea to sea to northern sea. We've managed to do research, go into what we ended up calling a archaeological cultural dig is what we call it. The first team was getting at the themes, the roots of what makes the history of Maillardville interesting, what makes that community interesting in a British Columbian perspective, in a Canadian perspective. So we undertook this journey, this exploration, this discovery. We've identified cultural artifacts such as the train station itself, which became one of the first heritage buildings in Coquitlam. We've also found some key elements that explain away the beginnings of Maillardville from the District Lot 46, Plan 2624, a plan that was put into the Land Registry Office, registered in the Land Registry Office in 1913, which showed that the largest mill of the British Empire had a plan for a settlement, had a plan for workers into the largest mill of the British Empire. That is the seeds of what started off becoming the story of Maillardville. So in our research, in our interviews, in the various events that we've attended, including the most recent one, well, the very first one, which was the library event, a very wonderful, successful attempt by the Coquitlam Library, doing what they ended up calling reconnecting with stories, Fraser Mills in Maillardville, and in French calling it Venez découvrir les histoires du moulin à scie Fraser et de Maillardville. An effort that was monumental from what I understand, and we've done today a very interesting interview with one of the key brainchild of this beautiful effort by the City of Coquitlam and specifically by the library. So the story of Maillardville goes at recording, discovering, finding what makes Maillardville so intriguing, so interesting, and so relevant to today as we move towards transformative realities in our neighborhoods, in our communities. Maillardville becomes a beacon for a hint of a Canada that came from over the mountains, over the Rocky Mountains in 1909. The train, the journey across Canada, the train station. We will be doing some beginnings of storytelling from the train station itself, where destination and arrivals, departures, such will be also stories that will guide us through the discovery and the exploration of Maillardville and Coquitlam and British Columbia. So with that in mind, I'm attempting to make sure that the viewer has a feeling for what we are doing with the Maillardville story. I'm attempting also to explain away the steps that we are taking to arrive at this narrative. Thank you. And welcome, audience. Basically, today I have a very special guest. Her name is Teresa Rahman, and from the Coquitlam Public Library. Someone that's done something very special that I wanted to highlight and earmark, so I want to thank you for coming in studio. We're talking about basically the Reconnecting with Stories, Fraser Mills in Maillardville, a beautiful event that was put on in 2016, in which the Maillardville story literally identified as being a significant benchmark part of what's happening in Coquitlam, and specifically related to Maillardville and Fraser Mills. So my question to you, Teresa, is really how this came about, because there's such a fascination that I have for it. Is where does it start? Go right from the beginning. Where does this idea, where does it hatch, and how does it happen?
Well, when I became outreach services librarian in about 2008, I used to serve residents at the Foyer Maillard, and there were children and grandchildren of settlers who had come from Quebec to work in the Fraser Mills. So whenever I visited them, they used to always tell me stories about their life in the Maillardville area, and of course I got used to that part of the city, going there quite often.
Yes.
And then in 2011, the Coquitlam Public Library published a book, Coquitlam Then and Now. It's a book about Coquitlam's history for middle school children through the New Horizons grant for seniors.
Right.
And for that publication, I interviewed some of the residents and to get their stories, and became fascinated with their lives in Maillardville and the Fraser Mills. So the idea was there, the interest was there in my mind. When Coquitlam turned 125, being the librarian responsible for some of the adult programs at the library, I had to think of some innovative programs.
Yes.
And I wanted to think of some programs to celebrate our city's 125th year. So one day, I was working on the reference desk, and a lady came to the desk, and she happened to be a trustee for the New Westminster Public Library, and she informed me so excitedly about a program they had in New Westminster Public Library.
Right.
About the history of the various breweries in New Westminster. And it was such a successful program, really popular. So I got to thinking, we don't have any breweries in Coquitlam. What do we have that's of real historical significance that we could feature as a program for Coquitlam 125? Aha! Fraser Mills and Maillardville. And so the idea started, and as I normally do, I talk about some of the ideas I have with my colleagues.
Right.
And from there, I got some good advice, and we got Coquitlam Heritage Society involved, and the Society de Francophone Maillardville involved.
Yes, Joanne Dumas.
Joanne Dumas, and Anne Carlson from Coquitlam Heritage Society.
Yes.
And Jasmine Moore. And we held meetings. So we used to have meetings about once every 2 to 3 weeks.
This was led by the library,
yes,
calling
this was,
them together?
Me
Okay,
essentially
right.
calling, because I am the librarian.
You became the coordinator.
I became the coordinator, and we held meetings. Van City supported us quite generously.
Wonderful.
And so the Society de Francophone Maillardville, Coquitlam Heritage Society, Coquitlam Public Library got together and produced this program. We were really fortunate that Mayor Richard Stewart agreed to be the keynote speaker.
Yes.
If
was he
anyone,
the first? Was he the first coming on?
He was the first coming on. He was the first one we asked. We couldn't have asked for a better person, because
I agree.
Anne Carlson, acknowledged that Mayor Richard Stewart had a most profound knowledge of Maillardville and Fraser Mills.
And a deep connection
And a
with it.
deep connection with the area. And so he was the keynote speaker, and we were very happy to have this program.
Yes, because once the program began, what I heard about it was once it was set in motion, and already I hadn't seen the program, which is a lovely program. I notice here that, and I'll spell it out here, Reconnecting with Stories, Fraser Mills and Maillardville. Venez découvrir les histoires du moulin à scie, Fraser et de Maillardville. Why the two languages from a Coquitlam perspective at that moment in time? Because that's a very bold step and a very important one.
Well, first we wanted a publication for people to take home, and especially for the children. We wanted this information to be passed on to the young children of Coquitlam, and so we had a whole day program. During the day we invited some classes, and Joanne Dumont came and gave a presentation.
Wonderful.
But we wanted them to take something with them, a brief outline of the history of Fraser Mills and Maillardville, something really interesting that covered, most of the important information regarding the history. Information came from our two partners, the
Okay.
Coquitlam Heritage Society, Society de Francophone Maillardville, and our publicists put it all together. Pictures came
Wonderful.
from them, we put it together. But there was no question that it would be in both languages, because our book, The Coquitlam Then and Now,
Yes.
is in both languages, and there was no question at all that this would, would not be in the two languages. So this
Right.
is what we did, per kind favor of the Society de Francophone Maillardville. And
Okay, they offered the translation.
they did.
The Mackin House.
Did the research, and we added some too. So
Yes.
it was
Ah,
truly
so-
a collaborative effort.
Yes, yes.
Truly a collaborative effort. And I sent the electronic copies to teachers in the school district 43 so that they could share. Those that didn't come to the program could share it with the students.
Right, because what I did notice when we did cover it, and the library was very forthcoming when we wanted to come in, I contacted the library to literally cover this evening. Very professionally done from the library, because when people came, they saw this thing was going to be recorded that evening. There was really good preparation from the library that I really want to thank the library having given us permission to record and capture that evening. What I did notice, there was also a side display exhibit.
Well, that is really, that credit goes to the Coquitlam Heritage Society. They worked very hard. They had a display of items, dating 100 years ago.
Artifacts. Yeah.
And they had pictures. So they did their share of the work. It was amazing, and Anne Carlson also made herself a period dress, and she was dressed in that costume. So, we tried to have some food from the time. We did our best to remind everyone of the history of the settlers that came from Quebec in those days. Working with partners brings out ideas. I mean, that's what
Yes.
partnership is all about, ideas. And I think it was Anne Carlson who said, maybe we should talk about Fraser Mills area, Maillardville now. We've talked about the history, but where is it going on now?
Yep.
So we knew that BD Development was doing some
Total redevelopment.
redevelopment of that area. And so we invited them, and they were gracious enough to come. They brought their slides, and they showed our audience the kinds of developments they have in mind and what's going on right now. And the audience which asked, and which we wanted them to ask too, if the BD Development was doing anything to preserve the history of Maillardville in that area, because for the citizens of Coquitlam, it would be nice to have some reminders of what the land was before being redeveloped now. And so the representatives from BD Development was able to answer them that they're going to have, they're going to redevelop with some reminders of the history.
Well, what I found fascinating about that part was that the library became and did something as a connector to various peoples, and to explain away a specific part of our community, and lifted up, I believe, through cooperation and the partnership, a very interesting narrative. This is what I'm so fascinated by how it was laid down in this little booklet. I recommend everyone, by the way, that's viewing right now, to get a hold of or ask the library for this beautiful brochure that has a very important narrative in there about how the idea of Fraser Mills in Maillardville literally starts to create a very important starting point to the story of Coquitlam. And I'm referencing this to the 125th. Kudos to the library. It totally grasped a moment. And my question is as the various presenters that evening, so did each one of them, what was the sequence of them? So first, the mayor, as you said, he was gladly, accepted to be. In which sequence was it then the Mackin House people? Do you remember a bit how this came about, that you got them all together?
Just after I spoke to the trustee from New Westminster, and so the idea of, okay, let's have a program on Fraser Mills and Maillardville, a program about their history to celebrate Coquitlam 125. I think the next day, Anne Carlson came to my desk, and so I started to tell her about this exciting idea I have, and she said, I am at that time, I think she was the president of the Coquitlam Heritage Society.
Okay.
And she said, oh, we're on board too. This is exactly what we want to do. So she came on board, and her crew. They were just amazing, and because they have all the materials.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
then there was no question about not asking the Society de Francophone Maillardville. We had to ask them because they're an integral part
And you're
of
aware
the French
them.
connection.
Yeah, and you were very aware of them.
because
through Festival du Bois.
being a librarian and in the
being a
area,
librarian,
so I was very aware of them. So we all got together, and it was a collaborative effort.
So, my friend, in all this, thank you very much. Very.
It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Coquitlam Public Library. Without further ado, I'm going to ask our director, Todd Nicias, to come in and say a few words of welcome. Thanks, Todd. Please give Todd a welcome. Thank you.
Well, welcome to everyone. I wasn't planning on actually making any kind of speeches. I'm actually here as a fairly recent newcomer to the Coquitlam area. I wanted to hear what was going to be said about Maillardville. I do a fair amount of meetings with the different people in the area, and I just wanted to do a bit of a shout out to the executive director of Place Maillardville. He can't join us tonight. I was supposed to have a meeting with him this morning. He has a brand new baby daughter, so I think he has a few things that are a little bit more important. So congratulations to him. I wish him all the best. I'd just like to say welcome to all of you. It's great to see you all out for this kind of activity. Heritage covers so many different grounds. Just a quick note, we have transferred a whole series of documents over to the City Heritage, City Archives. We still have a whole, essentially an entire room full of material on Coquitlam Heritage, Coquitlam history, books, documents that came from different organizations that are all available to anyone who wants to do a little bit more research. And then of course down at City Centre we do have a heritage display in one of our display cabinets, and of course we have more here today. So please come into the library, talk to us about some of the things that you're looking for, and certainly we can facilitate finding where information is throughout the Tri-Cities, and certainly we can bring information from anywhere. So
My name is Richard Stewart,
I'll just move this.
and I represent the first time, I think, in Coquitlam history where the mayor was born in the city of Coquitlam. Most of our mayors, of course, have come from somewhere else. So therefore, truly the history of Coquitlam began in 1959 with the birth of the mayor of Coquitlam, Richard Stewart. And throughout the 60s, let's go back a bit. So like 4.6 billion years ago, there's this thing happening up in the sky, and the earth was formed. But history of our community typically doesn't start there. And we typically make it start for Coquitlam. We talk an awful lot about 1909 when the French Canadians arrived. We also end up talking an awful lot about dates prior to that, like James Cook, of course, in 1790 coming to discovering this part of the world, and Simon Fraser discovering it again in 1808. But of course, our history goes back thousands of years prior to that. Our human history we had a very established Aboriginal communities all up and down the Fraser River, all up and down the coast. The Coquitlam and the Coast Salish were very much societies here in Coquitlam. So when Simon Fraser came down the river, he was discovering areas that the people that lived there thought of him as a tourist. I went to Rotterdam last week. I didn't discover Rotterdam. I didn't try and name it something else. There were people that already lived there. So in some ways, it's troublesome to talk about the history of Maillardville or of Coquitlam as having begun at the time when Europeans arrived here. But nonetheless, Our name Coquitlam, of course, comes from Aboriginal. It, in Coast Salish, refers to red fish up the river. In some accounts, it's smelly red fish up the river, but we don't have that in our tourism brochure. And it refers to the salmon that use the Coquitlam River, which is named as well after the Coquitlam nation that lived here. So when Simon Fraser passed present-day Maillardville in 1808, with his companion, John Stewart, no relation, he did so in Aboriginal dugout canoes, and he really was passing and coming up, meeting well-established indigenous cultures. They were stationed at the time, or the Europeans in this part of the world were stationed at Fort Langley. They were trying to establish a better a place to be capital of this colony, but Fort Langley being on the south side, and the biggest risk for the British was the United States. They didn't want the possibility of an attack that would simply come across land and take over. So they thought the north side of the Fraser would be better, and they chose Mary Hill, which is now in Fort Coquitlam, because it overlooked the river. But as they were about to establish it, the engineers thought, no, that's not going to work. Why don't we try New Westminster, down the river a bit, and they chose a site which ultimately became the penitentiary site. Those of you who go back that far, a great big penitentiary on the banks of the Fraser, where the SkyTrain line goes near the Fraser now. After they had chosen that site and started to establish that year, it's 58, 59, the river froze for months, and it was possible then to attack from Surrey, which sounds scary, but it's possible to walk across the river. And so the engineers opted, well, of course we need an overland route to be able to serve this community, because you can't sail up the river in the boats of the day. So they built North Road. North Road went north from the penitentiary, straight north, and you picture where the penitentiary was near Royal Columbian Hospital, and it went straight north, and it kept going north. Eventually, a few years later, they carved another road called Clark Road down the hill. After incorporation of our community, another road needed to be built, and one of the first roads that needed to be built was Austin, and it went past Mr. Austin's sheep farm, and therefore was called Austin Road. Mr. Austin's sheep farm ultimately became the Vancouver Golf Club in 1910. The sheep are gone now. That's actually the oldest golf club in the Lower Mainland. Back then, you pretty much needed to do an overnight stay in order to go golfing there. In 1889, that's a number of years later, of course, we had slides up here that depicted it. Ross Mclaren Sawmill was established. How much do you think that one cost? To build a really significant sawmill on the side of the Fraser River cost $350,000. In 1889, President James Mclaren from Buckingham, Quebec, he died the following year after it opened, actually. It started producing that year, shipping by rail through a spur line to Westminster Junction, which wasn't in Westminster, it wasn't in New Westminster, but it was actually Port Coquitlam, was called Westminster Junction, and via ocean-going vessels on the river. And these were sometimes schooners and sometimes barges, very large barges. And one of the first shipments actually was by barge, a barge that held some 600,000 board feet of lumber, and that would have been a significant amount bound for Australia. And they shipped an awful lot in those years to Australia. And then they thought, well, we've got a lumber mill, we've got a thriving community, let's ruin it by setting up a city council, and which they did. They incorporated in 1889 the district of Coquitlam, which included at the time all of the land north of the Fraser River, all the way to the Pitt River, and all the land east of North Road. So we picture that square all the way to the mountains. Back in the beginning, the operation of the mill actually had to shut down during the winter because the river froze too much. So it kind of indicates how much climate has changed in 100 years. The river would actually freeze. When I was growing up, I remember those days when the river would freeze, but not as much as that. But I also remember the days when you could skate on Como Lake.
Oh, yeah, I did too.
Yeah, a lot of you do. But back then, winter temperatures could get to -5 Fahrenheit. That's minus 20, 21 Celsius, which is temperatures we don't get anymore, and certainly not in this area. So it would shut down the mill, not because you couldn't ship, but because the logs were frozen on the water. And the logs were always stored on the water because you didn't bring them in by truck, you brought them in by the river. The new company purchased and reinvested in the mill partly because the mill had slowed down production so much in the end of the century. A new company bought and reinvested and by 1906 had reopened with a much greater capacity. In 1907, they'd raised the production capacity to 120 million board feet from in the order of tens of thousands of board feet per year. Anyway, to the French Canadians, because that's what we typically talk about when we speak about Maillardville. Notre communauté francophone de Maillardville est née le peut-être 25, 26, 28 de septembre 1909. The Francophone community of Maillardville was perhaps born on one of those days, 25th, 26th, or 28th, different stories, different documents. The Columbian newspaper seems to be the definitive one at the 26th of September. And it was a contingent of 110 workers or so from the lumbering industry of Quebec. They arrived by CPR train. By some accounts, it's called the honeymoon special because so many of the couples got married the night before and were setting off to this new adventure on the west coast where they would work in a lumber mill. These were experienced lumber workers. Typically the mill at the time, most of the workers there didn't come from a mill work background. They came from hunting and fishing, and many of them, there were Chinese, there were Hindu, Indian, there were cultures from around the world that lived here at the time, Scotsmen, but typically not people that were experienced in lumber. And having worked in a lumber mill myself, I was one of those that wasn't experienced in lumber, and it is grueling work. And so the company went to Quebec and enticed 100 or so families to come out to this new community. And they brought a parish priest, le curé Maillard. Father Maillard was the first that was on the board there, or among the first parish priests, and from his name, M-A-I-L-L-A-R-D, is the name Maillardville. The community was given his name, and actually given his name officially in 1913 by the Postmaster General, who created a stamp and said the post office is now Maillardville. At the time they were inducing them because the inducements, I suspect, were something like, we'll give you enough wood or sell you enough wood to build a house, a little parcel of land, enough wood to build a church, because certainly the Catholic Church was an important reality for the French Canadian settlers. And that's how it happened. The church actually opened on December 10th, 1910, which would have provided a grand Christmas. It was destroyed, that particular church though was destroyed by fire 2 years later and subsequently rebuilt. District Lot 46 showed up here. District Lot 46 included one of my ancestors on what is now Burnett. Had a parcel of land there, didn't build on it, and never, we don't think, lived there. But Marcoux is my mother's maiden name, M-A-R-C-O-U-X, and when she got married in Vancouver, her father worked for the railway, CN. My father lived at Kamloops. His father worked for the railway, CN. And when both of their fathers my mother's father got injured, my father's father died, and my mother's father got injured and needed to move to the West Coast because of those injuries. He was actually squeezed between two train cars in a train yard. So they moved to Vancouver, and she started working for the railway in the ticket office, and my father started working for the railway in the ticket office. Guess how they met? Yeah, at work, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, they dated for 11 years and got married, and as their first son was born, they decided, she decided, let's face it, my mother decided that her kids were going to speak French. And so she went on the internet and found out that the only two... Oh, you guys are sharp. Yeah. I don't know how she found out, but anyway, there were two French-Canadian schools, there were two French language schools in British Columbia. Notre Dame de Fatima and Notre Dame de Lourdes, Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Lourdes, both of them in a community called Coquitlam, called Maillardville. And she told her husband that they're moving to Coquitlam. And once they figured out how to pronounce it. And off they went, and they bought a house here in Coquitlam in 1958, actually bought a lot from the builder. The builder would build the house. The whole thing was $12,000, $3,000 for the land, and $9,000 for the house. And they moved in 1959 in time for me to be born here in Coquitlam. Backing up, way back. So, Coquitlam, it's now 1910, the second train load has come, and these French Canadians are settling into this community, the district of Coquitlam, and there's vast amounts of land, and it's going to be wonderful. And a couple of years later, the people of, well, actually, our fifth mayor, so first mayor was R.B. Kelly, there were several others, and Mayor Mars became mayor in 1913. And actually, mayor in 1911. By 1913, he'd had enough, I guess, and he and several other landowners around the Port Coquitlam area decided they were sick and tired of having to spend money servicing and building roads in that wilderness up there where nobody lives. Why don't we take all the taxes that come with the rail yard, the CP rail yard in Port Coquitlam, let's take the taxes that come with that, let's take the wealth that comes out of that, and let's separate. We'll become the city of Port Coquitlam, and it will, read the articles from the day, it will become the center of the universe. Everything will happen because we have this massive rail yard and all of the transportation, and everything's going to work for us. And so they separated off. And within 4 weeks of that happening, that's spring of 1913, Port Moody had done the same. They decided to become the city of Port Moody and take all of the district's saltwater access. And Fraser Mills did the same thing and took the south part of. So now we have the fledgling district of Coquitlam that now doesn't have anything. It now has the Vancouver Golf Club, and that's about it. So anyway, the same year, 1913, actually, Essendale, Riverview, the mental health facilities that came to be so significant for Coquitlam were established with the beginning of the construction of West Lawn. Or actually the end of the construction of West Lawn, 1913. Center Lawn, East Lawn, North Lawn, Valley View, Crease Clinic. Massive investments by the province in mental health here in Coquitlam, and it became one of our largest industries, if you want to put it that way, as some people in here are well aware. And forensic psychiatric across the street at Colony Farm, which was part of that complex. When I was growing up, everybody on my street seemed to either work for the lumber mill or Riverview. And actually more of them, there were more people employed at the time at Riverview than there were employed at Fraser Mills. The Depression, of course, hit and wages were cut, and that resulted in a strike. The strike was quite crippling. It was, they were at the time facing 40% lower wages than the previous year, and they ended up with a 2-month strike. Eventually, that strike led to a very strong local IWA, International Woodworkers Association local. I was a member of in my teens and early years. The spring freshet of 1948 produced some enormous flooding. The spring freshet of 1949 was almost about as high, but by then they built some dikes down near Fraser Mills. And at that point, this became a big corridor. Beginning in 1950, the power lines went down and separated Maillardville from Fraser Mills a little bit. And 1953, Loweed Highway went through, and 1964, the Highway 1 was completed with Portman Bridge, and so all of those transportation and other corridors started separating the land, the flat land south of Maillardville from the community of Maillardville. By mid-50s, Fraser Mills was 1,600 workers a day. They had 1,600 workers a day, and the 1956 payroll was $6.5 million. It was an enormous part of Coquitlam. It was well known around the world. It had certainly at some point, the highest amount of throughput, or the highest production on the Pacific coast, and eventually one of the largest lumber mills in the world was right here in Coquitlam. And I'm going to stop there only because, mostly because I've run out of things that I know. And some of those things are not things I knew, they were on this piece of paper. I want to thank you all for putting up with this.
We have 2 minutes. Any questions? Would you like to ask questions? You have 2 minutes.
Are there any questions?
Where's Booth Farm?
Where's Booth Farm?
Yeah.
Booth Farm is actually the foot of Dawes Hill.
Oh.
So if you go down to the foot of Dawes Hill, this side of Dawes, the west side, not the long bumpy side, but the straight side, Booth Farm is right there.
Oh.
So in fact, Booth Farmhouse, the city of Coquitlam has purchased and is currently kind of storing it.
Oh.
But the hope is to eventually have a park that incorporates the Booth Farmhouse and a house next to it, and then the right-of-way, the hydro right-of-way, and Popeye Creek, Popeye Creek, it's one's, anyway, Popeye is one of its tributaries, but you didn't know there was a creek called Popeye, did you? There's a Popeye Creek. I used to play in it as a kid. My mom spanked me for that. One last.
So Maillardville, I always, as I grew up in Maillardville, I always wondered, well, like what streets, what part of Coquitlam was Maillardville? What streets do you find?
That's a very good question. Are there any other questions? Because we get asked this all the time, and I tell you, I got in a lot of trouble when we set a boundary on the road that my scout leader lived on. Yeah. Yes.
I was the mayor of Maillardville when I was living there. In another country.
Yeah, you lived about 100 feet north of Maillardville. So you have to draw the line somewhere, and the planners quite often draw the line at Edgar west of Blue Mountain, Rochester east of Blue Mountain, and then Laurentian. But is it Laurentian, or should it be the ravine, or should it be Decatur, and then some people said it at Marmont, which would make Notre Dame de Lourdes, not in Maillardville. So there's no question that if you leave it up to planners, it will be set based on some planning principles. If we wanted to determine it, we'd probably do it with a very fuzzy brush that said the stuff that's sort of red pinkish is Maillardville, and leave it at that.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you so much for giving us
I'm the executive director at Société Francophone de Maillardville. Maillardville is alive and well. Our francophones that are coming to Maillardville, well, in the past, as Richard mentioned, they came from back east, mainly in 1909, 1910, from Quebec and Ontario, from areas such as Lebrun and all that, these small towns near Ottawa-Gatineau. And the reason why they were requested to come to this neck of the woods is because Quebecers and Ontario people in that region, the wood industry is very strong, as it continues to be very strong back east in those two provinces, as it does here in British Columbia. So those are the three provinces where the wood industry is mostly vibrant. So hence why they were asked to come to our fair city. So when they came here, a lot of promises were done, as you can imagine. We'll give you this, we'll give you that, we'll build you this, we'll build you that. And of course, not a lot of those promises were kept, but they kept moving on, and they decided they're going to make it happen and make it good for their families. French Canadians are known for being people with large families, and so the community grew very, very quickly. And one of the reasons also they were invited to come and work here, I don't know if you saw that on the slides before, the motivation was mostly because of anti-Asian reaction to people that came from India, from Japan, and from China that were working in the mill. They wanted a wider crew to come. So when they were lacking crews for the mill work, so then that's when they went out back east and solicited those families to come to our fair city. So they came here, and of course the first thing that was built with the Francophones came here was a church. And the church was located on Carré Laval, Laval Square, which still exists. You can take it, it's off Laval Street and off Brunette Avenue. So if you wish to go look at what a typical French-Canadian square, which was borrowed from the reality of France and other European countries, you're more than welcome to. It's a very, very beautiful church. It's Our Lady of Lourdes, and the Laval Square is still there for you to visit. So when people came, they built a church. The first Parish priest was, as Richard, our mayor, explained, was Father Edmond Maillard. Father Maillard was born in France. He's from Cancale, and that's near Saint-Malo, near Mont-Saint-Michel. For those of you who know, that's the northern side of France. So that's where Father Maillard came from. He passed away, I believe, in the 70s, Etienne, or something, in Lyon, in France. And after working with us here, he did go work in the Kamloops area, and then eventually went back to teach in France. So that's how the beginnings of the community were. So you had a very strong French-Canadian Catholic families that were there, and they thrived and did very well for themselves and moved forward. So then in 1931, little did we know, our dear French Canadians, I mean, you don't invite French Canadians to move to your province and expect everything's going to go beautifully, because they're people of passion and people of determination. So they decided to to go on strike. And the motivation was the following, is that they felt that salaries were unfair. There were different salary situations for whether you were English, then it was French, then it was East Indian, then it was Japanese, and then the Chinese people were the last people that were paid the least. So for those reasons, they decided to start a movement and a strike so that everybody could benefit from equal opportunity and equal salary. And I think they were successful. There was a union that was created from that movement. The Union of Woodworkers of British Columbia was created after that reality happened. So then the families kept on, and there's a whole bunch of stuff with the Francophonie that happened. They were very proactive. They had parties and get-togethers and festivals and a whole bunch of stuff that were happening over the years. And then came along an opportunity. First, it was called La Franco Fête. It was called the Franco Celebration. And then a couple years after that, they created, a bunch of people got together in Maillardville and decided to create Le Festival du Bois. And Festival du Bois, a lot of people ask us, why do you do that in the month of March? And the reason is the following, is that the people who created Festival du Bois wanted to kind of recreate the energy that you see back east in the month of March with the sugar shack and the picking up of the making the maple syrup and so forth and so on. And that always happens in the spring. Hence why they created Festival du Bois that time of year, because of course if you've been to Festival du Bois, you know you can have some maple taffy on the snow. And it's not real snow, but it's okay. So Festival du Bois was created. Then our society, Société Francophone de Maillardville, was created. We count 4,000 francophones that we reach out to on a weekly basis. So la francophonie is alive and well. There's also, I have to say that the francophonie is a new francophonie now. A couple of weeks ago, we were holding an event to celebrate in view of Culture Days. We wanted to have a celebration around the francophones coming from Northern Africa, which is Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, and all that. And lo and behold, there were probably around 40 to 50 people that showed up, families from that region that all spoke French. And we even had a Syrian family that came here that were refugees from Lebanon, and they were from Aleppo, who came and were perfectly bilingual and so excited about having the opportunity to speak French and to be able to share with us in French. So that for us proves that it is an ongoing thing. A lot of families now are coming from that region, from Belgium, from France continues to come, and of course a lot of people come from West Africa, countries like Senegal, Mali, and all that. You will see Burgundy. A lot of people will come from that region. So now it's a new francophonie. And we change our logo with the colors of the international, using the same colors they have in the international francophone group that exists. And we wanted to demonstrate that now we want to be around all the same colors of the francophonie, which is everywhere from everywhere in the world. So the francophone reality is growing. Coquitlam, if you didn't know, is the district that recruits the most students into French immersion. So that's an ongoing thing. I know for a fact, because we give French classes also at our center for both adults and children, and the demand is very large. People really want to be involved and learn French, and now I think people are getting more this reality around the two official languages of Canada, which is great, and we help them to celebrate that reality and to make it happen. Okay, well, it was a pleasure. C'était un plaisir de vous parler. Thank you very much.
We often speak of those that can't see the forest for the trees. We know of those that can't see the trees for the forest, but I've added a very important other element, and it's even those that see forest and trees, rarely do they see the roots, without which neither forest or trees could exist. And in another language, I'd put it this way: l'arbre qui dort rêve à ses racines, et quand la racine s'éveille, elle découvre sa vraie nature. This is the wish we have here with the Maillardville Story Project. This is what we're looking for and hoping we're providing to the viewer. And happy exploration, happy discovery. Come along with us, and let's go discover some more. My name is Roger Loubert. I'm here with the Maillardville Story Project, and we are unfolding today looking at an author which just arrived in town. She's presenting a new book she's just launched, basically called the Les Autres Villes, which in English would mean the other cities, the other towns. She's an author that has some connection with Maillardville, with her book written in the 100th anniversary called Le Rêve de Monsieur Maillardville, which spoke of Monsieur Jean-Baptiste Dicker, or known here as Johnny Dicker. Bon, ben, salut.
Bonjour,
Il y a
Roger.
tellement longtemps qu'on t'a pas vu.
Oui.
Moi, ce qui me fascine, pour ceux qui nous regardent, ce qui me fascine beaucoup, c'est deux livres, finalement. Tu n'as écrit plus que deux, finalement.
J'en ai écrit deux auparavant, puis
OK.
là, je suis pour en lancer un troisième.
Un troisième, donc c'est le troisième.
Le troisième.
Donc, ce que j'ai compris, puis nous, les bonnes nouvelles qui traversaient le temps, nous a dit, oh, elle est en ville, elle est à Vancouver, elle fait un lancement du livre. Félicitations, parce que je trouve ça très intéressant.
I was interested in Maillardville because I could use the community in my work, you know, to convince the young ones that it was worth learning French. And so I'm a language teacher. I believed strongly in learning language and culture together. Yeah.
This was at Mills High School,
Mills
a very
High School.
historical
That was
school.
built by the pioneers in the beginning of the century. And I loved to be there, and I enjoyed my experience. It was a very demanding one, but I was so passionate about it, you know. I was working a lot, but it was rewarding, very rewarding. I mean, I felt useful.
Yes.
I can say I felt useful.
Well, I guess you arrived just at that moment.
Yes, I arrived when the newspapers were talking about the change of the name. It was originally la Caisse Populaire de Maillardville, and it changed to Village Credit Union. They were looking for a bilingual name,
Yeah.
and the village and village was chosen because it's, you know, it can be used in both languages.
Yes, and I recall that contest that was launched, and actually
Yes.
the gérant at the time, the manager was Jean Aussan,
Oui.
and the various peoples at the time were, I guess Maillardville, if we keep talking about, we're still talking about it today. I'm sure for the audience, and I'm thinking of, you remember Florence Desbugny, for instance, that did the research. Yeah, she's still around. We spoke to her recently, and she did the 100 people, 100 years, and at the same time that this book appeared, your book, the Monsieur Maillardville, Le Rêve de Monsieur Maillardville. Monsieur Jean Lambert, very much still recently we went to see the Jammers play, and we have footage of this so we can maybe reference it within this program so that the audience knows what we're talking about. But the Monsieur Maillardville of old, of course, Johnny Dicker, Jean-Baptiste, evolving to, of course, Monsieur Lambert really played a significant role in the community. And then Raymond Garot, which I was telling you recently, which seems to have taken on a role, Ray Garot as they refer to in English, but definitely Raymond Garot, completely bilingual, which is the nature of this village very strongly because the roots are here still to this day. It's in our quest ourselves to find how people express the experience of Maillardville, right? We've had so many people we've talked to, and we're finding, as did Robert Noël de Tilly, you might recall him in 1974, or you might not, I'm not sure just when you came here, but Robert Noël de Tilly had said these words. He came out here as an urban planner, and he's brought out here by the city, he's brought out here by the citizens of Maillardville, and the big question was they wanted to help Maillardville, so this planner comes out and he has this meeting. One of them is in English, one of them is in French. We have footage of this. And he's basically expressing this frustration by saying there is not two people in Maillardville that has the same definition.
There are not two people here in this area who agree on the limits of Maillardville, and so we decided to avoid the problem and just define a study area and a target area, which is what we have done.
Of what is Maillardville?
What is left of what
Yeah, what
was.
is it? Where is it? What is it at any one time? If you were to sum up what you're feeling in your heart is Maillardville from your time here, those 20 years, how would you define it?
To me, when I walk into the streets of Maillardville, it's like I hear them. I hear those people the enthusiasm that they were filled with when they came in, and they did have the nicest place in the west, with a view on the Fraser River, and the little church, and the community center, and you know, and it was full of all kinds of businesses, grocery stores, and everything was helping each other,
okay.
like a community
strong
spirit.
community
They
spirit.
worked so much building a village they would be proud of, and they would give their children in heritage. I feel it when I walk in the streets.
Wow.
When I come here, it's your team, the team that's still there, believing in the future. But if I have a wish, is that you know, when in the 70s, there was a movement of going back to your roots.
Yes.
And I mean, there was no limit when you could reconstitute, rebuild the past, and even go back to the working with your hands. You know, I feel that one day, and I hope it's not too far, there will be such a movement
That
of revitalization
yes.
might bring a new wind
Yes,
of pride,
yes.
and of recognition of what was done in the past, and why it is as it is today. The people work their heart out for what we have, and that is for everybody. It's not only for the Francophones, it's for everybody in Coquitlam, and everybody who comes from all over BC. Those people had BC in their hearts,
Yes.
not only
very deep.
not only Maillardville, but Maillardville was their home, was their place, the one they built and they believed in and they worked in. And for me, it's easy to just the name of the streets, and just, you know, it's on the hill. It's on the hill, and I mean, you know, BC is hills and mountains and everything. So I can feel like a fever again, you know.
Wow.
Of
And the light,
just
you feel the spirit.
looking down on the Fraser River.
Wow.
The wood, you know, their story is there, and what they did, what's been done about Place des Arts, and it's not 100% authentic.
No.
But the spirit is there. The spirit is there, and the little station, railway station, and all the Laval Square.
Yes,
it's still there,
The
and you know, it's all not all gone, but to keep French alive, it is so much work. I'm a teacher, and to keep French alive in the school, it is a challenge. So why wouldn't it be a challenge in a village and in a city? It takes people to believe in it, and there still are. Still are.
Yeah.
But to give you a hand, it would take a movement, a whole movement all together, and something appealing, you know, that calls for what people really enjoy today.
Ils rêvent d'un village, une coupe d'école pour leurs enfants, un clocher pour les mariages, les pionniers travaillent sur le temps. Ils rêvent d'un village, une coupe d'école pour leurs enfants, un clocher pour les mariages. Maillardville, tu as 100 ans.
This program was made possible by funding provided by the City of Coquitlam, the Francophone Affairs Program of BC, and TELUS.